I think the chances or the probability of a recession in the US in near term in 2020 is relatively low.
Low,
So if we,
okay.
it is. And if we look at the growth and the growth drivers, they remain somewhat strong. Specifically, the US consumer remains very resilient. In addition to that, if we look back and we look through 2019, most of the year was spent under the US-China trade negotiations and the tensions building around that, which is one of the tail risks which at least in the short term has been removed. So I don't think we are anywhere close to the risk of a US recession in near term, unless you see a shock to the system from a consumer perspective. On the other hand, your point about the US Treasury curve and the inversion of the curve, unfortunately, given a lot of the technical factors, given the fact that you have a significant part of developed market government bonds in negative territory, the Treasury curve itself doesn't really give you as much of a predictability about a recession as it used to in the past.
Okay. So you're saying that the probability is very low?
I would put low probability of a recession in 2020 in the US.
Even in the next 2 or 3 years?
And next 2 and 3 years, obviously, it's different. We are looking at a much lower base from a growth perspective. So you're looking at a high 1 to maybe a 2% growth rate in the US. So from that standpoint, if you do see some weakening of the consumer driven by weakening in the job market, it is possible next 2 to 3 years, very much the case given the length of the recovery since the crisis. But that's more of a 21 or a 2022 issue than a 2020 concern.
Okay, so not at the moment?
Not immediately, no.
Okay, that's great. Moving on to interest rate, what is the probability of the Federal Reserve or the Fed to cut down its rate again in 2020? Because as an emerging market, we need to be ahead of the curve.
So I would say some of that market probability of the rate cut has changed in the last few weeks, specifically with the spread of the coronavirus, and we've seen obviously some of the estimates from different economists in terms of the global growth and potential impact. Now, leaving that aside for a second, I would say in a base case, given the US growth on a standalone basis, you would probably see the Fed on pause for a foreseeable future. The chances of a rate cut are there, but they are low in 2020.
Wow, okay.
But the next move, I would put reasonable probability that it's going to be a cut and not a hike. The chances of a cut are there, but it's not necessarily in the near term.
How much basis points from your point of view?
So I would say the market is pricing in 25 basis points or so cut in this year. I would say, and this is obviously a lot of it is because of the recent events, which is different than where the probability was a month ago, which was much lower.
Okay. Now maybe moving on to our global economy right now. After the trade war now. We have the outbreak of coronavirus and also the tension between the US and also Iran. So how do you see the global economy in 2020 and also in the next, 2 or 3 years? So where are we going at the moment?
So, well, structurally, we are seeing the global economy slowing.
Yes.
But in 2020, as I said, given the temporary truce in the US-China trade discussions, if anything, we see it to be supportive for the growth for this year. And then obviously, as we go through the US elections, as potentially some form or shape of US-China issues actually crop up again, there will be some of that geopolitical risk that will remain with us, keeping the risk of possible recession in the future years, but it's probably not a near-term risk.
Not a